Good evening. I call the regular meeting of the Ames City Council for Tuesday, June 25th to order. Welcome, everybody. And we're good.
Oh, maybe just Gloria's mic.
I don't think mine's on either.
They're not on.
I don't think any of them are on.
Time out.
Remember, you have to talk right into it, so the people at the end get back in here. Nope.
Testing.
Yeah, none of them.
So the owl was just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
It was kind of like the canary in the coal mine. It was the owl in the council chamber, letting us know there was a problem.
Oh, I got some.
There we go. All right, we'll start over. Call the regular meeting for the Ames City Council for Tuesday, June 25th to order. Welcome, everybody. And we're going to move right into consent agenda. Is there anyone from council that wants to pull any item from consent tonight? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve consent as presented.
Move consent?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. We'll move on to public forum. This is the time we set aside for members of the public to address city council on topics that are not on the agenda. And I have one individual who signed up, and that's Sue Ravenscroft. You want to start us off, and then after that, we'll go with anyone else who hasn't signed up.
Thank you very much. Jerry Neal is going to pass out a handout I have, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm here because in discussions about Sci-Town, which is, a major ongoing issue, I keep hearing two misperceptions, two statements that are inaccurate, and I think it's our shared responsibility to avoid misinforming people. The first one is simply language. We use the acronym PILOT, Payment in Lieu of Taxes, while we're talking about Sci-Town. If you Google pilot, you'll see that it's payments made by nonprofit entities to local governmental taxing authorities. That's not what's going on here. We have for-profit entities like McFarland Clinic, so far the only tenant, making payments to ISU Athletics, which is not an agency that has taxing authority. So this is really not pilot, and we should probably regularly acknowledge that in our discussions. But my more important point is that I often hear that the reason you and other people support Sci-Town is because it is what Jamie Pollard has called an innovative solution to the problem of the underfunding and deferred maintenance at Iowa State Center, that this is how they can raise the funds that will rescue Iowa State Center. Numbers are a little hard to follow verbally, which is why I prepared this handout. And on that sheet, I did an Excel file looking at how much would the annual so-called pilot that the athletic department collects have to be to reach the $110 million that we have been told repeatedly is what we need to bring Iowa State Center back to life. And that number turns out to be $4 million. That's $4 million each year is the Ames portion of the pilot. Now, how reasonable is that number? It's not reasonable at all. Because remember, Ames gets, when we pay our property tax bill, only 1/3 of it goes to Ames. A bigger share goes to the school district, and then some goes to the county, and then smaller agencies. So that means the total so-called pilot that athletics would have to be charging Sci-Town residents is $12 million a year. That's a lot. Let's try to put that in some context. I decided to use information from the city of Ames, so I went to the last financial report. The last financial report Ames has issued or has on its website shows that the whole city, the entire city, has property that's subject to tax of over $5 billion. And because of rollbacks and credits and various, whatevers, the taxable amount is 3.3 billion. And remember, our overall tax rate, ours meaning Ames, the city, is about 1%. So the total taxes that were collected in fiscal 2022 are $35 million. Now, okay, remember, go back to do what Sci-Town says it's going to do in terms of rescuing Iowa State Center, it would have to collect over 12 million. That's over 1/3 of what the city is currently collecting. That's a big jump in property taxes or property tax-like. And 200 million, which is what the cost of Sci-Town is said to be, is a small portion of the 5.5 billion that the city currently has. It's 3.4%. So what we're saying is that an addition of 3.4% to taxable property would generate a 34% increase in property tax collected. It will not happen. So we should probably stop saying that it's going to rescue or make a significant impact on the future of Iowa State Center. So my hope is that in the future, claims will be more modest and more accurate. And this is outside my wheelhouse, but I hope that the ISU Athletic Department will look for other sources of revenue and fund it that way, because it's not going to happen through this. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Anybody else that wants to address council under public forum? Loris?
Sorry, I had to dance for you.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So I'm here tonight, first of all, to thank you. June 30th is when a $35,000 grant that you gave to Home Allies expires. Obviously, there's not an eightplex standing at 913 and 915 Duff Avenue. It all came down to high interest rates, Home Allies being a new nonprofit, and probably some illness. My illness kind of slowed us up from doing some asking. So I want to thank you, and thank you for the faith you put in us, okay? And we couldn't deliver. I'm sorry. We did recognize there was a problem, and so we have at Home Allies used some of the private funding that was donated to us, plus the Board of Supervisors and the Story County Housing Trust Fund rolled over some of the money, and we have purchased 710 Kellogg Avenue. And if anybody feels like they want to paint in the next 4 days, I've got lots of paint and lots of brushes. It's a 5-plex, and we just put out the applications to rent out for the units, and the 5th one needs to still be remodeled. And I want you to know who applied. We had 16 applicants, and we only really circulated the information among the human service agencies. Then Mary Greeley got a hold of it and whatever, et cetera, okay? Some of the statistics are almost every one of the women who applied separately, and even in a couple of couples, so I believe there were 8 of them, 7 or 8 of them, victims of domestic abuse, fleeing domestic abuse. 2 are still having their mail scanned and filtered through. 7 felons, all non-violent felons, mostly drug convictions, a couple related to domestic fights. We had a lot of people interested in those to 100% rent subsidies that the county funded for about 3 years for the unit to give us a base to work off of. I could have filled even more apartments than the 5. I could have filled for all, 16 of those of people who either interviewed or turned in an application or both. And tonight, as I was coming, my husband came home from the property and another person had stopped by and wanted to turn in an application. We have a serious housing problem for the truly low income. And tonight, you're going to be asked to do some things to help some people on Welch Avenue that need help to just move after their building is no longer in compliance. And I was on the Board of Supervisors that closed a mobile home park, Crestview. And so we did pay some money, so I encourage you to help with that, okay? It made a big difference to the residents out there. It'll make a big difference to your constituents on Welsh Avenue. You're going to be talking about asset and getting a lot of money to asset. And it's needed. It's not a good, sustainable, permanent solution. And I think everybody knows that, and the staff report even acknowledged it, that you have to find better solutions. I just wanted you to let you know, from our perspective, our little itty bitty project on a 100-plus-year-old house. And it's just drawing that kind of need in people coming out. So thank you for what you're doing. Keep doing it, and maybe we can be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wants to address council under public forum? You'd introduce yourself and you may start.
Hello, good evening, folks. My name is Orville Burbano. I represent part of the Mission Ridge Homeowners Association. And I want to thank you, first of all, for taking quick action on an email I'd sent earlier last week. Part of our group are elderly folks and students that cross the street there from Little Blue Stem to across Mortensen. And I know Councilwoman Belcher, Professor Belcher, I'd sent the email to her and she had passed it on, I believe, to the rest of you folks have seen it. So I'm just here to answer any questions, or I don't know if you want me to address that again or, okay.
Nope.
We'd really appreciate further study on the matter so that we could, right now it's summertime, the traffic is not too bad, but when students are back, that crossing can be dangerous, especially for elderly folks that try to cross. Or I know I've tried to ride my bike across one time and, not expecting somebody to come whipping around both ways. And, it's kind of hairy sometimes. So please consider that. I don't know what else I could add. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right, we'll close public forum and we'll move on to item number 41, resolution approving FY 2025-2026 asset priorities. Paul?
So Mayor, City Council, you know this, but for the public's sake, ASSET stands for the Analysis of Social Services Evaluation Team. And this team is made up of 22 volunteers and 500 staff members who, beginning this August, will really kick off the process to formulate recommendations of what human services programs each funder should consider purchasing from asset agencies for fiscal year 25 to 26. There are currently 4 funders in asset. The city of Ames is one of those, Story County, United Way of Story County, and ISU Student Government that collectively contribute about $4.8 million. So it's quite a substantial pot. And the city contributes about $1.9 million of that. The asset board members have a really important task in front of them. And one of the important guiding documents that they use in doing their work is the funder priorities. So every year, funders get an opportunity to set their priorities and well in advance, and then the funders at this time are reviewing their priorities, which is the item that's before you now. The city does have 6 appointed volunteers, and I've worked with these volunteers to get their feedback on the priorities and whether they should be updated. There was no recommended changes at this time, and so therefore the recommendation is that the funding priorities remain the same for FY 25-26 as it is for 24-25. With that, I'll answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Paul. Questions, comments?
I would just say, I think it's always good when the team actually believes that we have given them enough guidance to make smart decisions. And that's not always been the case. So I was happy that they were satisfied with the direction that we gave them.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, I entertain a motion on one of the alternatives.
I would move alternative 1, that we approve the asset priorities.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Thank you. All right, I'll move on to item number 42, resolution approving amendment to FY 24-25 asset contract with the Salvation Army to add $100,000 for temporary emergency shelter services. Pa?
Yeah, so back in April, the Salvation Army requested additional funding from asset funders to be able to provide emergency shelter services for the current fiscal year and the fiscal year that will start July 1. So on May 14th, the council approved adding $40,000 worth of purchasing services for emergency shelter. And at the time, staff mentioned that we would come at a later date with our FY25 request, which is before you now, for $100,000. We wanted to give it a little bit of time just to see what was the community need. And the Salvation Army has reported that the need for this service has not decreased, but continued to exist. And therefore, we're bringing the $100,000 request to you to purchase additional emergency shelter services. At the last council meeting, you did approve reserving $117,322 of unallocated asset fund for set-asides for emergency shelter needs. And so that funding is available there to fulfill this request if you choose to do so.
Thank you. Questions?
I just have a, hold on. Sorry, I need to go back to something real quick. No, I don't have a question. Never mind. I answered it myself.
Just to clarify, or is this additional funding, or are we reallocating funding?
So it is funding. So the $117,322 is unallocated, but reserved for emergency shelter services. And so the $100,000 that's being requested would meet that criteria.
One of the things that's not an apples and apples situation, when the services were being provided through the Bridge Home, there was a greater effort, from my perception, to connect people to various social services. Is the Salvation Army, do they have the opportunity to help people that they're serving to connect with other social service providers?
Yeah, I think they've really stepped up to try to do their best. Are they providing the level of case management that I think we would all hope for? I think that's beyond their capacity. I know that they are checking in with the folks who are receiving the service. And so once a day, they are connecting with those folks.
And
Yeah.
We'll have some public input in a minute.
And this is just a good opportunity for us as a council to acknowledge what we're seeing just anecdotally is an increase in homelessness in Ames, an increase in number of people who are staying in our Banshell Park and other public areas. We've received a number of emails regarding Campus Town and the downtown area. And it's particularly difficult at this time with the heat that's just crazy. And so we have a community that's very compassionate, and we're trying to do the best we can to help provide services. This seems like a very reasonable thing that we're doing tonight, but I thought it was just a good place for us to acknowledge just a couple of those things. Thanks.
Other questions? All right, we'll open up public comment. Is there anyone that wants to address council tonight on this topic? Yeah. If you would come to the podium, introduce yourself, and you may begin.
My name is Kathy Pinkerton. I'm the Service Center Coordinator for the Salvation Army here in Story County. And first, I wanted to say it's not necessarily that we asked for this money. It's that the money was available. We were providing the service and providing it at an exponentially increasing rate over the last several years. And we've done that with an office of 2 people. So is everyone getting 100% case management? No. But we did just hire a full-time receptionist. And so that's definitely improved. But what we've done all along is to provide resources to folks and to connect them with other social services agencies. Prior to them becoming homeless, a lot of times we've known these folks because we helped try to prevent it. So we do that prevention piece as well, along with Good Neighbor. And when we know that someone is about to become homeless, we do everything we can to try to prevent that. I work closely with the Bridge Home, with Youth and Shelter Services, with Access. So the goal is that if they can be served by one of those shelters, then that's where they go first. But if they max out their time, then we look at hotel stays, which is how our program works. So our temporary shelter program is at hotels. It includes a meal. So we deliver food out there. And then again, we help fill out applications, pay application fees. That's a big hindrance to a lot of the folks, is coming up with that money for those application fees. And as you know, apartments tend to rent August 1st to about July 26th in Ames. So if you become homeless in March, you're looking possibly at a period of time. It's not a perfect solution. There are, as you mentioned, still a lot of issues. But right now, today, we've got 27 hotel rooms at the Econo Lodge and 10 at the Motor Lodge. So that's 37 hotel rooms. Most of those have 2 or more people in them. So I will say that there are still some folks that we're not serving and we can't serve. If a hotel asks them to leave, there's not a lot I can do about that. And some of those folks you're talking about at Van Shell Park, unfortunately, can no longer stay at the Bridge Home and can no longer stay in any of the hotels. When one person gets a room, everybody else pretty quickly finds out. And one of the biggest reasons that people are asked to leave is because they have other people staying with them. I try to make sure that they understand that as long as you've not been asked to leave, you can have your own room. So it's, when you go into in a room, don't tell everybody, but if you do, make sure they come to us as well, and we'll see if we can't get them in there. The bills are pretty high. The Econo Lodge was just sold, and they're changing a few things. So part of what I do too is try to find other places that we can go, because we also don't want to have every single person in the exact same spot in the same hotel, because unfortunately then again, that's when we start to see some issues. So, and I do work closely with Julie Saxton, and again, other folks at the Bridge Home. We just had a meeting yesterday about what can we do about some of these folks that you're seeing that are destroying property and that sort of stuff. So again, this money isn't going to fix everything, but it'll definitely help us keep folks housed in this heat in the winter and that sort of stuff. So if you have any other questions, I can answer them.
Yeah, normally we don't have question and answer from public forum, but given what you're doing, and we really appreciate Salvation Army stepping up and helping out.
Thanks.
Does anyone have any any questions for Kathy?
Okay.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you coming. Yep. Anybody else want to offer any input or feedback under item 42? All right, we'll close public comment. Any closing comments or questions from council? Otherwise, entertain a motion.
I would move we approve.
Second.
Thank you. And that would be alternative number 1.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, roll call.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Very good. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to item number 43. Pa?
So item number 43, on May 31st of 2024, tenants at 228 and 238 Welch were notified by the city's inspection division that unless the rental property meets code, all occupants would be required to vacate the structure within 30 days of the date of the notice. The property's letter of compliance, which is necessary for a property to be rented out, expired in April of 2023. And inspection staff have made many attempts to verify compliance so that a new letter of compliance could be issued. This has not happened to date. The property owner has had over a year now to make improvements to meet code, and to date, they have not. There are a substantial number of code compliance issues in many of the units, including insufficient plumbing, lack of certified furnaces, broken windows, and missing or non-operating smoke detectors. So at the last council meeting on June 11th, you received a letter from Human Service Agency providers asking for financial assistance in the amount of $25,000, which could be used to assist the tenants and relocating them. At the time that the notice was issued, there were about 17 of the 19 units that were occupied. So it's a significant number of people who would need to relocate. Some of these tenants have already reached out to the various service providers, hence the letter you received, and the request before you now to authorize staff to enter into agreements with asset agencies to use $25,000 of current unspent asset funds to further support housing needs. There are some time-sensitive factors here at play. The tenants do need to vacate the structure by July 1st, which is in 5-6 days here. And July 1st also marks the beginning of a new fiscal year for us here. And so what that means is that usually by this time of the year, most asset agencies have drawn down their allocated amounts. And so this additional assistance would allow them to continue providing that housing assistance. We know that some of the tenants have reached out to various asset agencies for assistance, and they have been working with them over the last couple of weeks. And so our recommendation is that the $25,000 that are unspent of asset revert. What happened to it is it would normally revert back to local option sales tax, but in this case, we're asking that it be used for this purpose instead. With that, I'll take any questions you have.
So I have a quick question.
Yeah.
This is, I guess, sort of an unusual request for us, that being that it's specific to a property that we've condemned. I'm wondering, I'm supportive of allocating the funds. I'll just say that up front. But I'm wondering if there's a motion made to allocate the $25,000, if we can just make the contract generic so that it just goes towards services that we're already funding through asset rather than designated for this specific property.
It's up to you guys. So I think
Amber, I had similar concerns about that, primarily because we don't usually make decisions about who gets the money.
Right.
We pass it to our asset partners, and those agencies make the decisions. And so I also would be supportive, but would like to remove that clause that restricts the use to tenants for these two properties.
But just, would the work still be done if we remove that restriction?
I
mean,
think so.
Don't we have to? I mean, I agree if we can do this in an unrestricted manner. I just want to make sure that if we take that out, we're still meeting the objective here with these tenants. Can you address that?
Yeah, I think I think these tenants are seeking these services from these asset agencies. So I think we would still be meeting those needs.
Questions?
Well, I don't know if it's a question so much as just something I was curious what council is thinking about. I don't have a problem with this request either, kind of in either format that we do it. But my question is more about, is there anything in place to hold a landlord accountable in a circumstance like this? Or is there some sort of assistance we should be providing in terms of like giving information about that to tenants? Because what if you had a big situation where this happened? Like, I mean, this is already big, right? It's more than 17 people, families, and things like that. But what if what if you had a big building where that happened too? The landlord just lets it go. It begins to not meet rental code, and all those people get forced out of there. I mean, that's sort of a worst case scenario, but what's to stop that from happening? Or is there any mechanism we have, that we can think of? Or maybe this is a question for Mark better.
Right. Mark, could you, I don't know if you caught the whole question, but maybe if you want to restate the question.
Yeah,
for Mark.
my question is about this request to assist those folks being evicted, and what responsibilities a landlord has to maintain housing for a tenant, and sort of how does a tenant pursue that? Is there information we should be helping pass along to them?
We have language in our municipal code about landlords have to maintain a habitable, living environment, and there's various parts to that. It's also in the Uniform Landlord Tenant Act, which is in the Iowa Code, and it says, and it has a very specific procedure that people are supposed to follow if their landlord is not providing a habitable living space, and it involves giving the landlord notice, and then rent payment stops, and not. What the Landlord Tenant Act does not do is require the landlord to pay moving costs, but it says it requires them that they can be required to pay damages. So I would think that would include moving costs. I can't say for sure it would, but I think it probably would. But they have to do a civil action of some sort, a small claim suit or something in order to do that. I think what is best is if we steer the tenants in this situation to legal aid, so that legal aid can perhaps help them through that process.
Because I mean, and again, I don't mind us paying this in the short term to get them rehoused now, but I feel like there should be some financial repercussion for that for a property owner in a situation like this. Anybody else have thoughts on that? Or
Well, is this one of those instances, Mark, where state law sets a bar and we can't go beyond the bar, or
No.
I don't know what the situation would be.
No, I mean, we can provide financial assistance to help these people.
No, I'm sorry. I meant legally speaking, could we say there's going to be a municipal infraction imposed for landlords that are responsible for the...
We could impose municipal infractions based upon the situation that was there. And I presume Sarah's looking at that. That doesn't really help the tenants if we do that. It's just a way of sort of, punishing the property owner for not keeping the place up. But I mean, I reread the Landlord Tenant Act provisions regarding this today, and it's real clear. You have to give the landlord notice, and then that will terminate the lease, and then the landlord's liable for damages. But again, you'll have to file a civil action in court, likely small claims, in order to get those damages. But I don't. There's nothing that's being talked about here that I think would conflict with Iowa law.
Well, so what I was thinking was we have the habitable building requirements.
Right.
But is it possible for us to say that if that building becomes uninhabitable and renters are displaced, there is a different sort of infraction imposed other than the inspections, habitable space requirement?
Yeah, but I think we'd have to amend our ordinance to do that.
And one of the safeguards I think exists is that I think we have a very robust inspection process now. I mean, the interesting thing is it'd be interested to know the history of this property and what its rental inspection. We don't have that as part of our forum tonight, but my sense is that this is a fairly rare situation. I think by and large, the landlords keep the units up because they can't get a letter of occupancy and compliance rather from our city inspection department. If I could bring us back, did you have anything else on this?
Well, I was just wondering if, if after the motion on the funding, if we might, or maybe I can do it during council comments, just ask for a memo from staff on their thoughts on, I guess what inspections is planning to do and what. Oh, so
let's
is
do
that
that.
right? Okay.
Yep.
Then I'm fine.
Yep, thank you. Go ahead, Tim.
The staff report indicates that most of the tenants are low income. So can you quantify how many tenants are low income?
I can't give you that number off the top of my head.
And that's okay. And Steve, do you know, is there any precedent that we have for this kind of assistance?
Best of my recollection, first of all, this is probably the one instance where we impact the greatest number of people. We have declared other rental units dangerous buildings, but there were probably conversions that had less individuals in them. What makes this different, I think it's occurring at the end of the fiscal year. And if you should want to help these people, perhaps the money we've given to the agency that normally handles it do not have sufficient funds right now. Otherwise, it was the beginning of fiscal year, you'd say we have enough money and they can just be served by those agencies. So I think that's what makes a difference here. But I don't know if there's any precedent for the magnitude of the number of people that are.
It's just helpful to know. And Pod, do you know, final question, and I'm supportive of this request, but is there a concern that there may be other buildings out there that we could be having the same conversation in 6 months, in 12 months? Have you had any interaction with inspections to get a sense of whether she thinks this is an isolated event?
I did ask that question, and the feedback that I got back was that there's nothing on the horizon that we see that is of this magnitude. There might be, like Steve said, one off, two off units here or there, but they don't have the volume of people that this one does.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I could be remembering this incorrectly, but didn't we fund an emergency request at some point from Micah for dental services when there were significant changes in Medicaid funding and they were growing in terms of clients because people were getting dropped from other dentists. And so we funded a mid-year sort of emergency request.
I thought the question was about houses have been declared.
I thought you were asking if there was precedent in
Broader.
doing an out of asset cycle.
Yeah, so your
one-off
point's well
request.
taken.
I'm sorry. I didn't.
I was focused on the housing,
Okay.
Yeah.
but I think your point's well taken that if we look more broadly than that, there has been that, and there may have been another asset funding because they can only predict so much, and sometimes there are changes that we need to be responsive to.
Okay. We'll open up public comment. Is there anyone who wants to address council on this topic? Don't need to apologize.
Okay, Kathy Pinkerton again. I'm Salvation Army. So I have met with a lot of these residents, and I was originally the one who kind of asked, like, what can we do? Can we ask you guys for assistance? 4 things that most of agencies don't provide besides deposit, first month's rent, moving expenses. Somebody brought that up. I would say all of these residents definitely meet, they're well below 30% poverty level, well below. Majority of them, if they do have income, it's Social Security. And usually that's SSI, so in the $900 range. They don't have a way to get their belongings out. They don't have any place to put their belongings. So I can help with hotel. The other issue is that they have a lot of pets. And so we're looking for places for these pets to go. One of the questions that they have asked me to ask you, and I don't even know, again, this is all new, I think for everybody, so I'm not sure if this is even the right spot, but their questions are, when their time is up, if they know, say for example, they have a place within a week or two, can they stay? When we talked with Sarah, when we talked with the city originally, she had said it really isn't up to the city to evict. The landlord, Greg Wilson, can say that he's evicting. Instead, they just, it's uninhabitable. They can put a sign there, but they can't necessarily make people leave. What the folks are wondering is, will the city turn off their power? Will they allow them to continue to pay their bills and keep the power on? And I don't know if anyone has thought of that. So that's just a question that they have. They're not wanting to leave. They're being told by the owner and the property manager that they should squat and just stay there and bring attention to it, get media, that sort of thing. If they continue to pay their bills, I guess I don't see that as squatting. So those are some things that you're going to be, that I guess I would like you to consider and wonder about.
Yeah, and I think that we're starting to stray afield. It's really more or less, the question is there $25,000 that council is willing to allocate to an agency?
Okay, like I said, I didn't know if this was the
No,
spot,
that's
but just
fine.
know that you're
They're-
going to,
they're
I
good.
don't know that they're going to leave.
Yeah, they're good questions. I think that we're going to defer to staff. That'd be inspections and other entities versus a council decision. From a
So as
policy.
far as the money, I will tell you that the couple of agencies that are interested in doing that, that's what the money would be for. Deposit, first month's rent, hotel stays, possibly shelter stays, and then getting them moved.
All right, thank you. Anybody else? All right, well, close public comment. Is there are you open to making a motion, Amber?
Move alternative one.
Well, no, wait. Alternative one is very specific, and I think Amber brought up, and I think Lori also supported that. And I think it's more or less, instead of being a specific targeted use, it basically be a more general nature from a motion standpoint. So
I'll withdraw the motion. I'll let Amber make the motion.
I would move that we allocate $25,000 of unspent FY24 asset funds to be used to support housing services that are already funded through asset agencies already under contract.
Is that the same as what it says on page 200
know.
of our council action form?
On where?
where?
We have a number 1 and a number 2
No.
that were stipulations for the contract.
Oh,
And I was thinking of just removing number 1 and leaving number 2, but if your motion covers number 2, it has a very specific list.
Yeah, do we have to give specific agencies or not under the recommendation?
I think can you with your motion make the recommendation of whether there are specific agencies or not?
I'm sorry, what
Sorry.
you say?
Sorry.
I just said agencies who are already under contract
Yeah.
for housing services.
Yeah. So we would be changing. Yeah, so I have that noted
that make
down.
sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense to me. I don't know if there's a.
So that would cover the number 2 item, which says service provided must be for temporary shelter, emergency temporary
Oh,
shelter, or
yes.
deposit and first month's
Correct.
rent, or meet the asset code, service code and definition 2.01, emergency assistance for basic material needs.
Yes, correct. It would cover
Okay,
that.
then I will second that motion.
Thank you. All right, roll call.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, very good. Thank you, Paul. Move on to item number 44, resolution awarding downtown facade grants for spring fiscal year 23-24. Kelly.
Good evening. You have 2 grants that we received that are presented to you for approval as second round grants. If you remember, there's a fall round and a spring round. There were no fall grants this year, so there were 2 requests this year that we're proposing to fund fully. The only change in the staff report is the estimate for work at the town center building went down slightly, but it's still over $46,000. So the max award of $23,000 is still eligible for that work. We'll note that with the town center building, they do have some building maintenance issues. And as we noted here that we don't give out grants without having proof of stability of facades. So inspections is looking at some building maintenance issues there, and we will follow up with that before an award is actually authorized to issue a notice of authorization to proceed. So with that, we're recommending approval.
Thank you. Questions?
I guess I have a question about the Tom Evans Plaza rationale that's given about it being a former right-of-way, that it used to be Burnett. Isn't the language in the grant guidelines simply that the facade is visible from the public right-of-way?
I'm not sure where that quoted language lives exactly. When I look at the eligibility requirements for first round approval, you must be a front facade. So clearly it wouldn't meet the definition of being a front facade.
Mm-hmm.
And then it says in the spring, you can look at, there's still a preference for Main Street and facades that have not received grants previously. The language that we've always worked from is that a facade grant belongs on a front. It was 2014 that facade grants were given to the buildings across Tom Evans Plaza. One of those did include essentially the front entrance to the Thai restaurant and some improvements at the corner there. I think it's a Remax Real Estate now. So it was viewed then at that time as an other facade in relation to Tom Evans Plaza as this public place right away. I don't know what the perfect rationale was for that, but that's what it was, why it was granted there. So we're really translating that same thing over here to the town center. There's no real call out that says this is eligible or not eligible because of the plaza.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just thought that maybe we're going a little bit too far to try to make the case if there's somewhere that it does say visible from the public right away.
Yeah, I don't think
I don't have a problem with it.
that isn't anything that I was looking at this afternoon in relation to that. When I went back to 2014, the justification wasn't really written the same way either. It was just that it's a secondary facade, the way a corner would normally have had two fronts. Like that's always been the vocabulary, is front facades are what get the grants. And it was, the justification was it's the front. If you looked at it as what it used to be. And again, they do have a front door with the Thai restaurant. There's a side door on this facade also. It's not just upper story windows. So it seemed to be pretty similar, even though there's not clearly a business entrance there right now.
Any questions? If not, I entertain a motion.
I would move we approve the downtown facade improvement grants for 616 Fifth Street and 330 Main Street.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Some roll call, please.
Aye.
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 Thank you. Move on to item number 45, North Dayton Avenue Industrial Park TIF agreement with Dayton Avenue Development LLC.
Yeah, we're returning to implement the direction you gave us back in May. So before you is the changes to the agreement. It addresses three issues. An increase in the total amount of rebate available to the developer for specified public improvements. The singular lot number 2 gets an additional $22,000 adjustment up for the land price ceiling that applies to that. That's not per acre. That is a one-time $22,000 total cost. And then there was a deferment of assessing the penalty for completion of the first speculative building until after June 28th, which is coming up at the end of this week. And then the second resolution here is that part of the development agreement, before you ever give the TIF rebate to the developer, they had to substantiate costs. We've reviewed every receipt. That was part of the evaluation of getting up to the $3.1 million of the total project. So we're recommending that you find that the developer has substantiated the costs in accordance with the development agreement requirements. If that happens tonight, then in November, and I'm laying this all out because we haven't ever done it this way before, just so you all know what's happening. In November, you do have to take an action to certify debt for the urban renewal area. And when you certify the debt, that's when we file that with the county, and then we'll collect the TIF, and then we'll redirect it to the developer. But that last action doesn't happen tonight.
Thank you. Questions? All right. Is there a motion resolution approving amendments to the development agreement?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. And entertain a motion on resolution finding the developer in compliance with the development agreement for substantiation of public improvement costs to allow for approval of the first year of the TIF rebate.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. On item number 46, the Bluffs at Dankbar Farm Subdivision's final plat, second edition.
Yeah, and in this case, this is on the regular agenda rather than consent because of the request for the extended sidewalk deferral without having the financial security specifically for that full duration. It is built into the first edition or this like second edition's total improvement costs. And the way this is set up is that if you grant the sidewalk deferral, it will last until such time as the council requires it to be connected or to be built with the last edition of the Damani phase. You'll remember with Bluffs, there's kind of two projects within one. There's the Damani small lot PRD project, which is what this edition is serving. And then there's a more standard residential lot subdivision it's on the south side of the project that is not part of the Damani. It's all part of one PRD, but the Damani piece is this small lot piece. So normally sidewalks must be constructed within 3 years of the addition that's being approved. In this case, it's being extended out for a much longer period of time. With that, we're recommending approval of all three of the items that are listed here.
Thank you, Kelly. Questions? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion on resolution approving sidewalk deferral request.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Entertain a motion on resolution accepting financial security for public improvements.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
And entertain a motion on resolution approving final plat.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. On item number 47, staff report to determine the process for rezoning of 113 North Dakota from residential low density RL to residential medium density RM within urban corridor designation.
Good evening.
Hi, Amelia.
Hello. So on the screen, you have a map of the property. This is the 2040 plan designation. For land use, you can see it's designated UC, which is our urban corridor designation. It's also zoned RL, residential low density. And so RES Development recently acquired the property and desires to develop it as medium density residential, while the developer desires greater density. This UC designation also indicates that there's goals for redevelopment and intensification for the site. As a result, the applicant has requested that council consider the process to rezone the property. We've determined that there are three options to facilitate the rezoning. The first would be to keep the current land use designation and interpret that RM, residential medium density, is consistent with it. UC doesn't have an implementing zoning district right now, so this would be a new interpretation from council. It is the most expedient option, and there are grounds in the Plan 2040 to make this interpretation. We included some development guidelines in your staff report. With this interpretation, we'd also be initiating a rezoning to RM with the PUD overlay to ensure the site is designed to interface with the street appropriately and protect natural resources. A second option to facilitate the rezoning would be to change the land use designation in Plan 2040 and then do a concurrent rezoning again to residential medium density with a PUD. This would be an option if council determines that UC doesn't support standalone residential development and wants to change the emphasis on the site for commercial and mixed use development that comes from that UC designation. Staff believes again that we need a PUD overlay with this option. A third option would be to write a new implementing zone for the UC district to address standards for mixed use commercial and standalone housing development. This is already programmed as part of our comprehensive zoning ordinance update and would be started on this fall, but action on it by council would be a reprioritization of that item. So it gets done faster versus we're looking at 2026 for that complete comprehensive zoning ordinance rewrite. And then a fourth option would be to take no action if council has a preference for commercial or mixed use development on the site. Staff does agree with the developer that there's limited potential for standalone commercial on the site. You can see it doesn't actually have frontage on Lincoln Way. The only accesses are on North Dakota. It's right in, right out due to a turn lane. So with that, those are your options. I'm happy to take any questions on what they are or the benefits.
Questions?
This has been a property that has been sitting sort of vacant for a long time, and it's a prime property, so it's exciting to see some redevelopment there. Do you know what the developer's preference is of the options?
I think option one, being the most expedient option, would probably be their preference.
Okay, that's what I would assume. All right, thanks.
Other questions? I was surprised when I saw this, that there's that little narrow strip on the south side of that property. So that's owned by someone separately?
Yes, that person, I believe, also owns the two other properties to the east. And so all three of those properties are only allowed to take access out to South Bend Drive and then down along the frontage road to get to Lincoln Way. I do believe the property owner has reached out to that other owner and asked if they were interested. And I don't believe they are at this point in developing those properties, which would really be necessary to make commercial work on this site.
It just seems that that small strip of land is just extraneous, so to speak. But
Does that mean then that the rezoning that we're doing for this property gives us insight to what could happen with that strip in the future? Or does that face completely different issues than the larger portion of the site?
I mean, the small strip is not part of the application. It won't have any interface with the site.
No, I know that, but in the future, as we consider this, is that similar to what we would have in the part that's under review, the 113 South Dakota or North Dakota?
I guess I'm not sure in which way it's similar in that it's owned by three properties are owned by one person. We would view that as one site. I'm sure it has no utility as a 50-foot wide strip of land out to the corner other than maybe for signage. It's a shame that that's the way it's configured, but I don't know if there's anything that can be done about it.
Okay.
The history out here is the person that owns those three parcels bought them so nothing would happen on the land. So not a lot of interest in seeing development there.
Mm-hmm.
any other questions? Open up public input. Is there anyone that wants to address council on this topic tonight? Seeing none, we'll close public input. Entertain a motion.
Move option one. Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Motion carried. Very good. Thank you. Move on to item number 48, review a draft RFP for development of surplus land, city land at Harrison and Welbeck.
Good evening, council. Tonight, we're back from May 14th to talk about proceeding with an RFP for the sale and hopeful development of single-family homes on our 1.7 acres of surplus land at the intersection of Welbeck and Harrison. This report is really covering two issues. One is the discussion from May 14th about could open space be integrated into the site? What would that look like? And in effect, what would that mean to the development of the site? So that's kind of the first topic that we're going to cover. And then the second part is we've listed out what we think as staff are the intended terms that we want to put as priorities in the RFP. So I'm going to go back to the open space. With that discussion in May, you had neighbors talk about their current use of the surplus property. It's not a designated park. It's informal use as they are allowed to use it in the neighborhood. We reviewed our park policies with you in May. There is no park policy that says this is an area that is underserved and is needed to be reserved for some kind of public park, but council did want to look at other options for open space in the area, so that's what we put forward. So we gave you a series of 6 examples. There's multiple ways this property could be built upon, so don't take this first graphic as what you're going to see from a developer, but I thought it was a good way to show a pattern of development that kind of used up the land, gave some space, and met some of our other small lot intent. So the first model is really that base number, and we think 12 is probably the max that you could do. Those would be fairly small homes, but you could get 12 homes. You could get garages for all of the homes in some kind of configuration similar to this and meet other code requirements. So as we started to look at what does open space mean to the site, the phrase that council used was substantial open space. We tried to look at what does that mean. The first one is to think more about just really a feature near the street. It's a smaller kind of little, I used tot lot was the phrase, so a smaller little 5,000 square foot set aside. Obviously it takes out, we said it took out a couple of units to do that and up near the front. And then we started to look at bigger patterns and to see what that meant. And as we got larger, obviously homes start to drop off. And one thing you start to see is the infrastructure stays the same, but the return on the infrastructure starts to drop as you keep houses towards the back, but you still have to build all of the same roads and pipes to serve that. So we can get to some reasonably sized space, but as not needing to be a neighborhood park of any particular type, our intent in this was it was just open area. It wasn't necessarily park amenities at that point. So that was kind of what we were looking at. And what I noted here in this 10 to 17,000 foot range, you can see just by this graphic, some of these lots are very large in this neighborhood, and the amount of set aside space is really equal to 2 backyards of 2 homes. And granted, they're really large backyards. Not everybody has backyards like that, but it was interesting to see that juxtaposed against that pattern in the area. Now, as we got bigger, I think we had to look at different ideas to use the site. So to get up to this 17,000 square feet, to get to a larger one, there really wasn't a real way to use that same development pattern. This is like a pocket neighborhood, but it's really tight. I don't know that it's truly feasible. I was just trying to show if someone really built small houses, wasn't worried about garages, yes, you could do this. I don't think that that's what we're going to see in a development proposal. So then we looked at the last option, or there's 2 other options. If you move away from small lots, or you look at trying to maximize the square footage, you look at the property a little bit differently. If you went with one of the traditional cul-de-sac options, you could get to this nearly half-acre size, and it leaves 4 buildable standard kind of large cul-de-sac lots at the end of the street. I do have some reservations about that in terms of, again, the infrastructure cost to get to those 4 lots is pretty significant. May or may not be feasible to a developer, but it is a way that you could look at this if this is what our goal was for the site in trying to have open space. And then the last option is the biggest open space, and on its own, it is a pretty good green space. Staff's concern was really its accessibility in terms of to the neighborhood, not its ADA compliance, but just its visibility and accessibility. If there was a way to put that near the street and have the same project, I think you'd have a pretty good argument that that should be our priority. I struggle with putting usable space in the back. And then likely in this case, it's a private street. So you're weaving some kind of public walkway through this area to get there. Just wouldn't feel like public space, even though it is. From a development perspective, it's probably a pretty reasonable development pattern. It minimizes the length of infrastructure. This maybe will be something you actually see. The version that we had originally was those would just be larger yard areas for those back homes. So they might be smaller homes, but they could have larger lots rather than set aside some kind of a general neighborhood space. So with that, I think we've covered the different options in terms of how you could really situate this. Obviously, there's different patterns we'll see in the RFP, but there's not really any way to put more green space than what's shown here and have any housing development. So I think that's the first question is if you want us to put green space into the RFP, I think we need to know that up front. I don't think any developer wants to respond to the RFP not knowing what's expected and to say, well, we'll sort it out through the development review process. We're not going to get any proposals. So I really need action tonight on what's expected. And then the second part, I gave you a long list here. I think what's important is our goal is to get a proposal. I think we have an intent for small lot, ideally some kind of a pocket neighborhood as we talked about, just to show proof of concept and see a different type of variety of housing built. But even small lot is a variety itself that we don't commonly see in the city. And I'm talking about lots that are well under 5,000, 4,000 square feet. So more of that very small lot. It's kind of the pattern of the home, a little bit of a rear yard, but really no side yard, no real front yard. Just trying to, again, get a compact home, compact lot. And there's some other examples in this neighborhood and some other parts of town for that. But I think the priorities that I want to point out that we would put into this are really looking at what are the things that council expects or desires out of the project. We thought that, again, in going through Plan 2040, we do have a policy to support ownership housing construction as a preference. So we are putting that into the proposal, that we would use the same kind of primary residence language that we have in the covenants for Baker subdivision. So if the primary resident wants to rent their house with a roommate or something, that would be possible, but it can't be an absentee landlord situation. We wouldn't let a letter of compliance with no property owner residing at the property be allowed through this process. So we're getting some version of a single family home with an ownership component, if that's what we keep in this. I do have in here, again, we want to make sure we get a proposal. That's our number one goal. I do have the intent here is what would really move one application above another. So we have in here some of the language about the climate action plan, about net zero construction. So the way that'll be worded in the RFP is that's a goal. It's not mandatory. We'll identify the incentives that Ames Electric has available to them so they can understand that that's there. But that's something else I think that we wanted to make it known that that would be a secondary priority to us, to be able to get to net zero ready homes. There's different ways they could do that. They could respond to it, say I'm all electric. They could say I'm absolutely going to be net zero. I'll achieve what I listed here as a 42 on the HERS index, which is a rating system for green building. There's different ways people could respond to that. So I think that'll help us sort out what some of those features are that people are willing to put into the projects. So overall, I think the intent here is to be flexible, but to let people understand what our priorities are so that you can sort out, if there's multiple proposals, which priorities you want to emphasize. You do have to illustrate development feasibility. So they will have to articulate some concept for the site. They will have to identify the general building type they're going to do, and they will have to have some version of a pro forma so we understand what they're thinking the development costs of the property are and what they think their return on investment is, to make sure it's a feasible project. We don't want to go down the road of picking a partner that can't really build a feasible project, and we waste another year of time on something that doesn't turn into a development. So any questions on the open space or the list of priorities, I'm happy to answer those.
What is our recommendation? Why?
Our recommendation is to not include a mandatory open space requirement. We feel that the priority of the infill housing was superior in relation to the options for the open space. If it's a 10 lot project or 10 unit project, that's probably still fine. But if we start to drop units below 10, I think viability drops pretty quickly. And I also don't know how usable the open space we're getting truly is. But we wouldn't dictate how it had to be. I think we would define, if you want one, again, the general nature, we would expect to see, roughly 12,000 square feet or 17, some number that the developer knows, and situate it somewhere on the property. But we're recommending to not include it as a mandatory requirement.
Kelly, is option 2 showing a likely city park space then, that top lot designation that you composed? I know there was some discussion in here about, are we assuming there's going to be a park, or is this just going to be open space?
So option 2, we talked a little bit about the ownership in here as well. Since Parks and Rec hasn't identified the need for a park, I would not take it to mean that it's a public park. We can reach out to, as far as I understand, there's not a homeowners association like you have in some of the more newer subdivisions that are actively managing communal property. So there's not a natural fit of the already managing some kind of land asset. Could we dedicate this to you? I don't believe that exists here. So it'd be a little bit harder to turn it over to somebody else, but I wouldn't foreclose on that idea if you included it. But I would also not promise that it's a public park, because that doesn't meet the park plan that we have right now.
Kelly, I had a question. We don't see any drawings of potential townhomes. Was there any thought to having attached housing as opposed to detached housing as a way of increasing the density in this space?
Yeah, when we did the original outreach meeting with the neighborhood, Eloise was the planner that did that. She had other housing types than this, but just to kind of simplify the open space conversation, I just stuck with one building type. So the RFP would allow for attached townhome type development or detached. So you could propose either to get to that 12 unit allowance.
We just have such a shortage of townhomes in Ames that just seems like I'm scrambling to try to find places where that might work. Just as a general comment, I love what you did. I think you really gave council some nice options to look at. And I have no regrets that we went through this exercise in having you look at these options. But having seen this in place, I'm struggling to figure out how we could make this work in absence of a pocket park for the city or an HOA that was tasked with maintaining this. So at least right now, I'm tending to support option one and am interested in the attached housing because I think there's a significant shortage of it. I want to go back to the climate action aspects of this. I worry, and maybe you could help me allay my concerns. The Baker subdivision is not a good model for me in our efforts to overlay climate action goals with the subdivision. What we have done there, nobody would ever do, no one should ever do by imposing the requirements that people use the geothermal system. It's horrible. And I worry about loading a factor into this that makes it one of our criteria and how that might skew the outcome of the project. In other words, if we have two RFPs, one without this as a criteria and one with, how does that, do you think, affect the RFP responses?
I mean, for just the number 13 on the list, I think is what we're talking about, which says preference for all electric high efficiency homes. For example, HERS index score of 42. So I don't think the layout's any different. If you want to deploy natural gas down the street corridor and hook it up to the homes, the layout's not going to be any different. It's just going to be the details of the home construction. And what's important here is high efficiencies in here. You can be all electric and be very inefficient and still meet code, which is terrible for the occupant. So what's important here is that we're not just being electric for the sake of electric, but they are putting in high performing equipment. So they can use an air source heat pump to accomplish this. And if you want to compare it to geothermal, air source heat pump, it's cheaper to install. It is, from a climate perspective, it's likely better than a gas-fired furnace in terms of emissions. It just doesn't go as far as geothermal. So geothermal was more of a chore to install, has a greater benefit over time from a climate perspective. Air source heat pump is in the middle. It's easier to install and also has a positive impact on the climate scale. It's just not as far as geothermal. So I think for a home builder, I don't think including air source heat pumps, they'll have to factor that in. If they can't do it, it's not required, right? So it's a preference. If you say I can't create a house at a price point that I intend to sell here, and that's part of and you say that in your proposal, we'll still review your proposal.
And so the geothermal added tremendously to the cost of the units. If we have the language here for all electric high efficiency homes, would that increase the cost for the buildings?
So we've had that discussion a few times. It kind of depends on where you allocate the budget of the home. If you want to build a home of a specific type and at the last second you're switching everything about it to just be high efficiency, the cost is going to go up because you've added features to the home that were in addition to what you were expecting to do. If you set the budget of the home at whatever number and you integrate those things at the beginning, what's the trade-off? Are you just choosing slightly less finishes? Are you choosing different parts of the aesthetic elements of the home to make sure you have the high efficiency components of the home.
Right.
That's the question always is what am I comparing it to? It's always going to be more if you tack it on at the end. It may not be more at the beginning, but you're definitely going to save on your bills overall. That's the whole point of the net zero home is going to be super high efficient at a score of 42 on the HERS index.
Okay.
Your utility bills are going to be lower. You're going to get payback off of that.
Okay. Thank you for your help.
Speaking of the price of the homes or the home budget, would it be possible for us to have any sort of preference on a lower price of home? I think that's one of the advantages of maybe a pocket neighborhood or a townhome is hopefully having more moderately priced housing. So could that be something we include in the RFP as a preference?
I think, the answer is yes. I'm trying to look at what I've already written. I'm trying to sort out, we're not dictating a price point. I think we've been articulating, we would, like, let's say this was the proposal for large lots. They're probably not going to be the lowest cost homes, right?
Yeah.
We've definitely articulated in here, we prefer more and diverse housing. That also generally being a smaller house, something more diverse, maybe a lower price. But without setting a price point, I'm not sure how to tell the developer what we prefer for a price point. We were definitely emphasizing diversity of housing type and variety over price.
Okay.
But do you think if we did a 10 to 12 unit lot with no set aside for open space, that lower price point is going to come about naturally though?
Mm-hmm.
I think the small lots, to get to
Yeah.
the small lots, I don't know what we're all thinking is a reasonable price, but I can't believe it's going to be over $400,000.
Correct. Yeah.
That would be extremely expensive small home.
Right.
Kelly, I also wanted to thank you for going down this road with the option of being able to set aside some land there. And I did wonder with that whole high efficiency piece, what's your sense? Some of the conversation was around what our local developers and equipment providers can do. Is it your sense that within Ames we would have the expertise to do this in a way that could still keep costs down, is what I'm thinking.
I think so to me, there's two parts to 13. I think a lot of people understand how to build an all-electric home and use equipment that's sized appropriately and is high efficiency. I think the question is, are they willing to go to the next step and design up front to that HERS index score, which is really increasing the insulation. Mm-hmm. It's not significantly altering the heating and cooling equipment. It's increasing the insulation values and the windows and doors that are going into it. And you start from the beginning to get there, and you're taking credit for all the measures you incorporate into that building to get into high efficiency levels. Okay. So I could see people responding, say, I'll do all electric, but not commit to getting to a 42. Some people might just walk in and say, I've done a net zero ready home. I know I can do it. And okay. Yeah, sure, I'll get a 42.
Okay. And I do like 13. I don't want that question to be misconstrued, but thank you.
And actually, the way I'm reading this now, it doesn't even say net zero in here. It just says all electric, high efficiency home. And then a 42 is in some people's minds, a 42 on the HERS index is equal to a net zero home. Mm-hmm. So yeah, net zero is not even on this list at this point. So I'll probably describe a little bit about the intent in the RFP, but the all electric is the push.
Okay, thank you.
So 2 questions. The developer that's eventually selected, would they be required to develop all the lots themselves, or can they sell off? And my second question is, I know we have an owner-occupied covenant, but does that permit group homes for social services?
The one in Baker would not, I believe, for the way, if we've worded it the same, the owner must be the primary residence, and typically in the group homes, that is not true.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer to our first question.
And the first question was?
Can the developer sell off too?
It does not say that you can't sell the lots. It does not mean you have to build the subdivision and build all of the homes. Okay. That is not my intent.
If I could go back to Rachel's question. Item 4 says, proposed a pro forma city land sale price, projected lot costs. I do think that a identification of a range or a target of what the sale price for houses would be important, or these units, because there are small lot standalone homes that are probably not entry-level price points in Ames. That's fine, they're selling, but if council's goal is to really try and get a diversity of housing, it's not saying that it has to be, it's just saying what is the proposed price point, and that would be used as part of an evaluation criteria. Because if it's, someone might come in just and show what you're proposing, 4 or 5 lots, they might have 5 lots, and say the lot's going to cost X, and then all of a sudden we find out that the house is going to cost $750,000, but we had no idea what it's going to cost, or the council didn't know ahead of time.
So I think we'd have to add something at that point. So the first 4 are there to understand the details of the project, their minimum submittal requirements. I wouldn't take them as criteria, because I didn't articulate to anybody how I would judge the value of your property.
Right.
It was really about the feasibility. If you come in and say the lot's going to cost $120,000, I'm going to kind of question the feasibility of your project. So if we really need to, I would have to write something in here to let the developer know that the price point of the home is part of the selection process, because right now that is not the case. And if you want that, I can write something. I'll have to think about whatever the motion is. I'll have to figure out how to do that. But I would need to know that.
Do we have any idea what that target would be on a small lot, single-family home that's meeting these requirements? It seems like it'd be difficult.
I mean, I wouldn't expect anything under 300. I mean, the lowest price point is really a townhome starting at 350 right now. So I could see 350 as maybe a starting point. I wouldn't be surprised if it's $400,000, depending on the total square footage. To go below that 300, I think you would have to articulate that that's required, and I'm not really sure how they would get to that point, unless they're really building very small homes.
I'm just looking at the adopted values and goals, and we value diverse housing options for the community and increase quantity and variety of single and multifamily housing units at various price points or rental rates related to new construction, rehabilitation of existing housing. It just seems that to have a price point and that they be, I understand inflation's going to come in and maybe have some other circumstances, but it wouldn't be more or less they would propose X and it ends up being 1.5X as a minimum. That would be in violation of their agreement essentially. And for example, they might just say, I'll give you $10,000 for land to try and get the lot prices down, but then all of a sudden the house is just really way over. It's just more or less, I think it's just information. Again, it's not saying it's mandatory. It's just you're having the information so council can go ahead and parse through the evaluation process. That's all.
So I want to follow up with this. There's the reference to the diverse housing. What do you mean by that?
Which one are we reading?
On item number 5 for the requirements.
Yeah, so 5 is to get to our goal is small lot or a pocket neighborhood over a standard cul-de-sac with 5 lots on it.
Yeah.
So I would say the diagram up front is standard housing.
Mm-hmm.
The other options, no matter what it is, whether it's attached or detached, would be a more diverse housing type. In my opinion, if the only feasible development is 5 lots on a cul-de-sac, council would still proceed with that. But if you have another option that's more housing and it's different, that would rank higher.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I'm cognizant of, we're doing this development within the context of a much larger neighborhood.
Yep.
And so I just want council to keep in mind that I want to do something, it can be different. I mean, you've got some great examples in Ames where you have subdivisions that have a variety of different housing types, but they're consistent within that neighborhood. Would the city be putting in any kind of utilities to this?
No. So the proposal will be clear. Everything is in the street. Developer takes it from the street into the project. We will not have any financial participation in the project.
So if council wanted to help drive down some pricing, we could seek to do something.
You do that through the land.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And question. Would this property would be subject to tax abatement?
Yeah, as ownership housing, yes.
Okay.
All right, open public comment. Is there anyone that wants to address council on this topic tonight?
Hello, I'm Ryan Davis. I live at 4201 Crestmore, just one lot north of this vacant ground. I was out of town in May when this came before the council. I just want to say the kids that came up and spoke for keeping that as an open space, I am so proud of those kids. They came up here and because they use it. I wish you would come up on a weekend afternoon and see them play soccer or baseball. There were flying kites out there the other weekend. Some people use it for a driving range, and it is very valuable to the people in this neighborhood. The other thing is, I wish you would walk the property because it doesn't look as big as it does on paper. It is very small compared to what it looks like from a 10,000 feet. If you could probably only get 2 to 3 houses in there without upsetting the flow of the neighborhood. If you put smaller homes in there, that changes the whole complexity of the neighborhood. Single family homes, townhomes, they still mesh with the neighborhood, but smaller homes don't. And I just wish you would reconsider and just leave this all open space. It's just not a good deal for the neighborhood because we love to use it. You talked about maintenance. Right now, there's a neighbor that mows it. He mows it and he sprays for weeds. He doesn't ask for anything. He does it on his own volition, which is what a neighborhood does. And we want to keep it the same way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Anybody else?
Orville Burbano again. I was kind of interested in the discussion about geothermal. Just wanted to mention, we've had 3 geothermal homes, 2 out in the country, and then one when we moved into town to the townhome neighborhood association we belong to now. In that place, I contacted, at least 2 responded here in town about putting a geothermal, and they all said that place was too small. You can't get to it. So I contacted somebody from out of town that does geothermal, and they put one on in our property. In a small area, they dug the hole and put the system. The upfront cost is quite a bit, but over the long term, it does pay off. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right, we'll close public comment. Council?
This is a really difficult decision for me because I like the idea of leaving green space. And my primary concern is one that I'm told is not really a reasonable concern. And that is if we leave the green space as in option 6 between the tracks and the homes, there's a buffer. And it also provides the largest amount of green space while also maximizing the number of houses. But I also can appreciate the difficulty of transiting through the privately owned properties to get to that space. And I do wonder, given the way the kids are using the space, and we did hear from them and we really appreciated their input. We would not have had planning draw up these different scenarios if we had not heard them. But I do wonder if even that strip is big enough to do the kinds of things that the kids would want to do. And if it's not big enough for that, then it just comes down to providing a buffer strip between the rail tracks and the houses. And I wouldn't want to live next to the track, but a lot of people don't care. So that's where I am on this. Option 1 or number 6 are the two that seemed most reasonable to me.
I liked option 6 too, but I think, and we've learned this lesson in other projects we've tried to do, I don't want to limit our pool of people who might try to attempt this project by requiring the open space. I'm hoping that we get, that there is a little open space they program into it just for the purposes of that pocket neighborhood, but I just don't want to limit the number of potential developers we might work with. So, but it's not to say we didn't hear the arguments of the neighbors. I am sympathetic to that. So,
All right, is there a motion?
I would move alternative 1.
Second.
Okay. And is there anything that you would like to see changed or added to the 13 points that Kelly has included?
I would like to suggest that there.
Okay, so all right, let's do this.
Motion.
Let's take the motion. We'll vote on the motion. I didn't know if Brown wanted to add anything. If she didn't, we'll go ahead and those in favor of the motion for alternative 1, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Is there anything that would want to be added to the RFP?
I would like to propose that we do add a preference for having information about the expected cost of the home, whether that's a townhome or a standalone or whatever type of project that they are proposing.
I'll second.
Would that
That's
be-
just
would that be
information
sale-
about the
Would that be
cost.
sale price or cost to
Sale
build it?
price, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Sale price.
Just like a range, like
A
homes
range.
would be
A
priced
range.
between
Mhm.
X and Y.
Good. Go ahead.
It's when it's a preference, it's evaluation
Right.
criteria,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Well, I guess it depends how it's worded, because I think the motion needs to be clear. Do you want it as listed as preferences given for lower cost homes over more expensive homes, or are you just asking for the information?
Well, there's two things. One's preference. One could be, it's part of the point factor, right? Preference would be you disregard all the other points and you
There's
disregard-
not going to be points because
Whatever.
we're not going to make you have a minimum score. It's not going to be that kind of an RFP. So-
preference means that would override all the other 13 points.
No, there's
No.
multiple
No.
preferences.
Is that what you're
There's-
saying?
No, there's multiple preferences,
Just wanna make
right?
sure.
He's asking if we're going to take that into account or if it's for informational purposes only.
Yeah.
Yes.
My intent is for informational purposes only, but
All right, those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. Anything else?
I'd like to propose removing item 13, preference for all-electric high-efficiency homes. And my reason for this is that the homes that are being built today are coming standard with high-efficiency appliances, high-efficiency furnaces, and air conditioning units. And our climate action consultant from Canada made it clear that the market would automatically value these kinds of aspects of the home. We don't have to legislate them in. And I'm very nervous that, to Bronwyn's point, that the more that we load the criteria up, I think we're going to risk limiting the number of potential developers. And I think that's really important. So I think we should do this one without the high efficiency homes.
Is there a second? Motion failed due to a lack of second. Anything else? All right,
Exciting.
very good. Thank you, Kelly.
Thanks.
We'll move on to item number 49, motion approving or denying a 12-month Class E retail alcohol license, neighborhood liquor and smokes. Chief Huff? Oh, I'll invite public comment in a few minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. We're here tonight to discuss liquor license application for Neighborhood Liquor and Smokes at 3505 Lincoln Way, Suite 105. I am not going to go into a ton of detail because we have discussed this several times. But what I will note is under the liquor license that was denied renewal by the City Council in November of 2022, which is currently under appeal, Neighborhood Liquor Mart failed 4 compliance checks over a 3-year period. And at this point, my recommendation stays the same as it was in the past. Given the series of compliance check failures, the proposed order from the administrative law judge affirming the City Council's November 8, 2022 denial, the affirmation of the ALG ruling by the director's designee, I continue to recommend denial of the application.
Any questions for Chief Huff? Okay, and Council, I'm going to ask that, or not call for a motion on this item until after closed session. First, that was a request from the applicant because the closed session is going to be dealing with this topic as well too. And I think it also might depend, subject on what the closed session determines, it may affect your motion as well too. But anyway, but we're going to continue on with, we'll open up public comment, and Mr. Parrish, thank you for coming, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Haley and City Council members. Mr. Faraz is of high moral character. He has no criminal record, no adverse litigation, supports his family and pays his bills. He is of Pakistani descent, but he grew up in Ames, Iowa, graduating Gilbert High School. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Faraz and Neighborhood Liquor. His family is seated back there. This is a family business. He supports his sister who's in medical school, helps pays his medical bills for his family, his mother and his father, paid his way through Iowa State University, graduating in genetics at this business. And he has a sister at Iowa State University. Mr. Faraz, in May of 2023, met with the Assistant Chief of Police when I think the chief was under the weather or out of office. He explained to them everything he had done to improve his business. He invested in the state-of-art software and hardware, and also agreed to, which you'll see in some of the data we provided to you, ways to improve his business. As you know, this happened during the pandemic when employees were very difficult to get and to train. That was part of his problem. But since Mr. Faraz has graduated from Iowa State University and delayed working on his doctorate, he's had 25,000 transactions in the store and no violations of being able to pass compliance check. He had 3 compliance checks. Now, one, ABD took it off because every 4 years, if you can show training, you don't have to worry about a compliance check. They will take one off. So it was reduced to 3. He's out of term with the other one, which is a 3-year statute of limitation that runs. So he's down to 2. So he understands that he has a 30-day, it could be facing a 30-day suspension. And it's not disputed. But what he's asking for is not a 12-month license, but a 6-month license on probation so he can continue to support his family. The other violation that he had was an employee he hired who had ADHD. And we provided a copy of the video of that sale to the chief of police to have him review it. If that's a mitigating factor, he's down to 1 violations. The other violation was the public comment that the chief made. If you look, we did provide a copy of the criminal record of the young man of the mother who spoke about the public issues that they had there. And I'll close with a couple of more comments. He's subject to a 30-day suspension. He's been closed now for approximately 11 to 12 days. He runs the business himself. to support his family. And I told you about the ABD issue. During the time that he would ask to come back for that 6-month period of time, he would agree to be on probation and would come back in after that 6-month probation asking for his full license. We're asking you to consider approving this. And as the mayor has said, we're not asking for a vote until after you look at all the data in the public session. I want to first of all thank you for the opportunity and time to appear here tonight, and thank you also for your public service. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anybody else who'd like to address council on this topic tonight? All right, seeing none, we'll close public comment. Council, do you have any questions for Chief Huff? Otherwise, we will move on. All right, we will move on. Item 50, follow up on scope of stormwater modeling for conservation subdivision ordinance changes.
Good evening. So this item is related to amendments to our conservation design ordinance that was discussed back in March. And council asked staff at that point to reach out to developers of the Auburn Trail and Hayden's Preserve developments, which are our 2 remaining sites in the watershed, the Ada Hayden watershed, where this conservation design ordinance applies, as well as the Friends of Ada Hayden group. And then the second item council asked us to return with was a scope of work for a consultant to evaluate any potential changes. So the staff report included a summary of our discussions with both the Friends of Ada Hayden and project developers. I think key issues for the developers were just creating more flexibility so they could have more usable acres and thus density. Key changes to those goals would be amending the 25% open space set aside requirement, and then the requirement that 8% of a lots abut open space. The Auburn Trail developers specifically noted they needed 20% more lots to make their pencil project. And while density is important to Hayden's Preserve as well, their project doesn't necessarily hinge on it. There's more issues with development agreement requirements for infrastructure. And I wanted to bring this up because I think, increasing density means there's more impervious surfaces in these developments, which means more stormwater runoff. And so part of the scope of the consultant is evaluating these changes, looking at these developments in terms of what they would mean for the Ada Hayden watershed. These changes would also be compounding on recent changes in state law that I know you're all familiar with how cities can regulate stormwater, and those changes will likely result in higher runoff rates. So in combination, changing the ordinance with these changes in state law, what we're looking at is a greater volume of water released over a longer period of time at a higher rate, especially for smaller storm events that could cause channel erosion. And so with this in mind, the scope of work has 3 scenarios to show quantitatively what these changes will look like, both isolating the changes in terms of state law and changes to our conservation design ordinance and together. So those scenarios are a baseline scenario so we can see what the existing conditions are today, looking at just with changes required due to that state law change, what the impacts would be, and then compounding on that, what would happen if we change the conservation design ordinance specifically with that open space set aside requirement and the requirement for the number of lots that have to abut the open space. I think the Friends of Ada Hayden were very interested in seeing these results as well. So staff has contacted an engineer, Greg Pierce, with RDG to discuss the scope. Mr. Pierce indicated that it would be approximately a cost of $14,500 and could be completed this fall, October. So staff found that while this is a minor cost, and it will delay a decision on the ordinance until the fall, it will provide valuable quantitative information on what we're actually looking at in terms of these changes and discuss it for, specifically what we're looking at for the impacts on Ada Hayden. So we are recommending alternative 1, which is to finalize the scope with these 3 scenarios. And we can take any questions.
Thank you. Questions?
I think this is exactly what we were hoping for in terms of trying to understand is whether this kind of analysis is something we could do in-house versus something it would be beneficial. And I'm sort of excited about this because this may be in some ways a precedent for how we would look at similar projects in the future just through a lens of understanding the impacts on stormwater, so surface water. So it's very, very encouraging.
Thank you. Other questions, comments?
So where does the question about waters of the U.S. come into this? Is that something that we're seeking to answer without the consultant, or is that something that the consultant is also going to answer?
That wouldn't be something that could very feasibly be modeled as part of the consultant's work. I think when we're looking at these ordinance changes, though, down the line, we will be looking at, are we, with this change in waters of the U.S., still looking at protecting only jurisdictional wetlands? How are we incorporating not wetlands that are no longer being protected in stormwater treatment trains to kind of maintain a natural hydrology on the site? But that wouldn't be necessarily something that the consultant could build into the models, since we'd need a determination from the Corps of Engineers on what is and isn't a jurisdictional wetland.
So at what point will we have a decision from the Corps of Engineers?
Staff encouraged the developer who indicated that they no longer believed they had jurisdictional wetlands to reach out as soon as possible to request that determination for their site during our meeting.
So what we have in the conservation area is if they do not have proof it's not jurisdictional, we'll have to treat it that way. In other parts of the city where we allow for mitigation credits, it's not exactly the same. But here, the ordinance expects preservation of actual wetlands, and that's how that's been applied. So.
Other questions? So the developers identified a number of issues, and is there going to be some parallel evaluation going on by staff to try and help bring back to council not only this information, but also answer other questions that might be impediments to seeing these developments move forward? I mean, the staff report identifies that developers indicated use of cul-de-sacs, longer block lengths. I think backing up to a lot of lots had to back up to open areas. So it would seem that that's not part of the consultant's responsibility. So I'm just curious, are you planning on doing that in parallel? So in October, you get the consultant report and staff feedback and this, so council has a complete package to be able to say, okay, now we get this. Because it would seem ideal over the fall, winter, they could be doing potentially some designs and try and get some land opened up, in the spring, which I think next spring, I think that's everyone's goals.
So in March, you referred all of the issues to us in the AADC task force letter. So we were just giving you an update of what we had heard, or more specifically, we had asked for specifically what does it mean to you, because a little bit generic in the letter. So we wanted to recount that to you. The intent here is there's no more modeling of these things. I think what we said in March is we're going to bring back a comprehensive package. We're not willing as staff to piecemeal every standard. We need to see what the final outcome is. And if we can understand how the project's going to work, then we'll look at how the standards need to change to make the feasible project work. I think as I've had this explained to me, what you're buying right now is an understanding of what the more development intensity on the site is going to mean to stormwater. So that's why we're modeling the two issues here, because they're going to lead to more development, more impervious area. And then from there, how you get that onto the property, that's these other standards, the cul-de-sacs, the street lengths, those kinds of things. So if the system can handle the intensity, then we got to come back and look at the standards that hold back the intensity. But if the system can't handle the intensity, we don't need to undo those standards necessarily.
So you're saying that this has to come first? Otherwise,
we think so.
You're spending staff time doing something which may end up being exercising futility.
Correct. Like changing the street block length, if there's no increase in density, the developers are pretty clear that doesn't change their performance.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other questions? Open up public comment. Is anyone who wants to address council on this topic? Jerry?
Good evening, Jerry Neal, 916 Ridgewood. I'm speaking on behalf of Friends of Ada Hayden. Really appreciate the opportunity to be part of the discussion and to talk with staff. Of course, we're very nervous about any kind of changes to the ordinances. I think that what is important, though, is that we all keep an eye on one thing, which is we want clean water going into our water supply, into the streams feeding Ada Hayden, into Ada Hayden Lake. That's the ultimate goal here. Clean water going in there. And there may be different ways to get at that, other than just what we have laid out. So we are thinking and focused on the ideas of infiltration and retention, and as such, supporting this idea of having this additional modeling. So we do support the staff recommendation. So thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Anybody else? All right, we'll close public input. Any closing questions or comments? Otherwise, I entertain a motion.
Alternative one.
Second.
Thank you. Those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining?
Can I ask a dumb question about the map?
I think there are no dumb questions. Go ahead.
It is going to be, but no. So on the map that's attached on the staff report, there's a blue line that indicates the Ada Hayden watershed. But on the south edge of Ada Hayden, it goes into the lake. And I mean, the whole lake's got to be the watershed, right? And so I guess I'm wondering, really, what's the watershed? Because that south border of it looks wrong to me.
I think that graphic was built for the former fringe plan, and it just didn't care about the city. So we're using a GIS file that was designed to represent north growth outside of the city only, and it doesn't really reflect all
The
things
actual
that drain.
watershed.
Correct, because there's parts of Northridge Heights that drain into the watershed.
Okay.
For sure, there's other parts
Okay.
too.
So the key is just a little inaccurate.
It's not the true watershed. It
Okay.
is the watershed outside of the city from
Sounds-
2006.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
But to your point,
What,
as they're doing the modeling,
they're going to include
gonna
the
include-
whole real watershed,
Yes.
right?
Yes, they will be.
yeah, that's a good clarification.
Okay.
That's not a dumb question.
Thanks. Thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item number 51. Ice Arena Coordinator position. Evening, Keith.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Yeah, this is atypical for us to come before council with a request to increase the FTEs for a position. But as was laid out in the council action form, there are a number of reasons. One, we have tried a recruitment at the 3/4 FTE. That was unsuccessful. We are hiring a new ice arena manager, which he will start next week, Monday, July 1st. We have changed the structure that this coordinator will report to the ice arena manager. And really the goal for this change is consistency, better customer service, improved ice conditions, and just facility conditions in general. There's other things that highlighted, but I think those are really the main ones. So staff's recommendation or city manager's recommendation is to go with alternative one and increase the FTE to 1.
Thank you, Keith. Questions for staff?
Keith, did you say the new manager starting July 1st?
Correct.
So when would we anticipate maybe being able to fill this position if we increase the FTE now?
So what we're doing is bringing this before council tonight to take action. We've already had conversation with Human Resources regarding going out. We also have another coordinator position, recreation coordinator. So hopefully what we'll be able to do is actually put these out, post a position sometime here in July. And we'll try to get somebody for both of those positions as soon as possible.
Any other questions? Otherwise, entertain a motion.
Move
approval.
approval. Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you.
move on to Item 52.
Yep. So for this one, I'm going to turn it over to Joshua Thompson, our Parks and Facility Superintendent, and Gabby Edwards, our City Forester.
Now for some exciting stuff.
Awesome.
You guys look like you're just ready to go. So good evening. I'm Joshua Thompson, like Keith said, Parks and Facility Superintendent with City of Ames. On my right is Gabby Edwards, our forester for this community. Back in April of 2023, the USDA announced some funding opportunities for communities and nonprofits to improve their urban and community forestry programs. Gabby applied, did an excellent job. I wanted to give her kudos for that. This is a great opportunity. It was the funding available was close to $2 billion, close to $2 billion available. And out of 845 applicants, there was 380, little over 380 that were selected, and Ames was one of those communities. And I'm going to let Gabby give some higher level details, but just over $810,000. Originally, we were applying for with a match of our own city funds, and the USDA said that we don't need to do the match, so which is even better. So go ahead, take it over, Gabby.
Yes, so this grant opportunity is meant to be 5 years. However, we're down to about now 4.5 based on 5 years started when the agreement happened with the Arbor Day Foundation and the Forest Service. So ideally, the grant will be finished by the end of September of 2028. So like I said, about 4.5 years. And it accomplishes many things around town. There are several things within that council packet. The way that the disadvantaged communities are recognized within Ames is it's more based on what's an EPA block. So think of a census block. The EPA actually has their own version of this. The city of Ames is comprised of about 50 EPA blocks. Out of that 50, we've been able to negotiate with the Forest Service and having 19 of our EPA blocks be considered disadvantaged. So the map that Keith has, those yellow areas or golden areas of town are the areas that are considered disadvantaged. So those work in those areas can be funded through this grant. And there's a collection of different work that can happen specifically to these 19 areas. That includes the removal and replacement of all ash trees. The DNR is able to come help us make management plans for our urban woodlands. And we were able to hire the Conservation Corps of Iowa to come in and do timber stand improvement, invasive species mitigation, trail enhancement, removing of existing downed debris, and stream bank stabilization. And then in those 19 areas, again, we can do additional tree planting. So we'd be able to have approximately $19,000 extra annually during this grant to fund additional right-of-way tree planting and tree planting in our parks. We will be able to establish a gravel bed nursery. A gravel bed nursery is think of growing bare root seedlings in a pile of gravel. It improves the root systems of those trees, and we're able to purchase them at a significant cost reduction compared to if we purchased containerized trees from our local nurseries. So we're saving money that way, but then also planting higher quality trees with higher survival rates. The grant also includes additional training through Tree Care Industry Association recognized staff, and the hiring of additional temporary staff members with our Parks and Rec forestry group. The collection overall, that's kind of the highlights of it. We do have a grant agreement with the Arbor Day Foundation. So the funds, it's a little bit confusing. The funds are being sourced through the U.S. Forest Service, through the USDA. The U.S. Forest Service, because they are awarded almost 400 grants, they can't manage all those grants themselves. So they are partnering with other organizations to help facilitate those grants. Our organization is the Arbor Day Foundation. So we'll be working directly with the Arbor Day Foundation for all of the reporting and reimbursement processes and everything throughout the grant. However, the funding itself is from the USDA Forest Service. And the grant agreement that is attached in the city council packet includes all the specifications of the grant and how we would be managing it. And then it is the belief that this grant is going to provide a real benefit to our community. We're going to be able to do more work than we have originally budgeted. We'll be able to hire more staff, make more on the ground impact, and be able to really be diligent about understanding what we have in our urban inventory or in our urban canopy and enhancing the quality and quantity of urban trees in our neighborhood, which is really a win-win. We think this is a great opportunity for our community, and the city council or the city manager recommends the alternative one, which is to accept the grant agreement and accept the grant overall.
Gabby,
Yeah, great work.
thanks for the presentation. I'm still unclear how Ames qualifies as having disadvantaged neighborhoods. I'm still lost on that.
So the overall grant, the initial request through the application was using a federal tool called it's the acronym is CJUST, Climate Environmental Justice Screening Tool, I think through I think that's through the EPA maybe, or through the Forest Service. Through that tool, we did not qualify. The city of Ames did not qualify as disadvantaged. That tool, however, in conversations with the Iowa DNR and the Forest Service, most communities in Iowa did not qualify because the stipulation that got us not disadvantaged was the CJUST tool uses what is called access to natural areas. And it was considering natural areas in Iowa as being agricultural fields. And we all know you can't access agricultural fields. That's private property and trespassing. And so most communities in Iowa did not meet designation of disadvantage through that tool. The application said you could meet it through that CJUST tool or other federal tools. So the other federal tool that we used is through the Environmental Protection Agency, and it's called EJ Screen, so Environmental Justice Screening Tool. It utilizes a bunch of different categories and criteria about what is considered disadvantaged. The area that qualified us for it is it's a mixture of environmental quality. So things like particulate matter, ozone, proximity to traffic, proximity to underground storage tanks, mixed in through the EPA's formula, combined that with demographic data, which is what qualified those 19 EPA blocks as disadvantaged.
Okay.
This is what we've been doing for the last 6 months, is figuring out which areas are going to be recognized. And that's where we got down to that 19. The other exception to that rule is there's another map that Keith has. The ash removal and replacement was actually expanded beyond the 19 original disadvantaged blocks to include areas that have limited English speaking, high unemployment rates, and low income. And the idea behind that, and that was accepted and proposed through the Forest Service, the idea behind that is those areas would be have an enhanced disadvantaged because of not having the ash removed. So those areas that had the limited English speaking, high unemployment, and low income, which are those blue locations. So the ash removal and replacement will happen in the gold and the blue, which in total is somewhere around, we think, 150 to 170 of our remaining ash in the right of way, which is a significant amount, close to half of what we estimate being left. And then the majority of the work, so that is the right-of-way tree planting primarily, would occur in those 19 gold-looking districts.
And where are we in? I mean, this all started with EAB, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, 8 years ago.
2014 is when we implemented the plan.
Oh, that long ago. And I happen to remember that was I think a $3 million budget item. So 2.3 for removal and 700,000 for
Over
replanting.
the 10-year plan, yeah, that's right.
And so where are we now on our EAB efforts?
Keith, do you want to move that map up just a little bit? So when I look in our inventory, so one of the components that I failed to mention in this grant is an updated inventory. We're using inventory data from 2014, which we found to be not encompassing everything that's actually out there and not being accurate. So when I look at our inventory with the data that we have, we estimate 377 remaining ash trees in our public right-of-ways.
Wow.
And then this particular grant would be able to remove and replace 145. So overall, for the Emerald Ash Borer Response Plan, we're about halfway through a 20-year plan. We just completed year 10 removals, and replacements will happen this fall for that. So we're approximately halfway, but really what that means is we've managed all the ones in our maintained areas of parks, so the areas of our parks that are mowed, not necessarily the urban woodlands, and then about half maybe of our right-of-way ash.
And final question. So I've been a big advocate for planting more trees, and we've always been told that there's an upper limit on the number of trees that we can plant. We can plant lots of trees, but we can only maintain so many. And so how does this grant change the score with respect to the maintenance of the trees that we plant?
So that's something that we are maintaining through our 5-year inspection and pruning cycle. And that was established, I think now we've finally made it all the way through the 5 years. And so we're just really starting to recycle through all of our tree maintenance. And that is assessing and doing work on all of our public trees once every 5 years. We've been successful maintaining that rate every year. So we're not falling behind on that with our current staffing levels. And then the addition to this grant is to have additional seasonal staff that would come and help me. So right now I have 3 seasonal staff helping me that our budgets pay for right now. This would include an additional 2 more. And that would be primarily focused on that young tree maintenance. So once we get the trees established, if we can get them established, watered, cared for, and then start that training process when they're young, we actually end up with less work when they're older. Because they are shaped and trained the way that they should be from a young age, as opposed to dealing with issues that should have been dealt with when they were young and now they're bigger problems.
Yeah, and then one final question. So this staffing is to provide the additional park maintenance staffing, but when the grant ends, is it anticipated that we'll absorb that staffing onto our general budget, or would that staffing end at the end of the grant?
I think it's important to note that at that point, we don't know. We'll have to evaluate it when we get to that point. And if funding is available, we'll maybe supplement that. But as of right now, this is only for the life of the grant.
Okay, thanks.
I would add, one thing that we've talked about over the last couple of budget cycles, and O'Brien, when you asked the question about, when can we get to maybe planting 2 for 1 or 3 for 1 for every tree that we take down. At that time, I've mentioned that if we take these 10 years remaining in the EAB and we can get it down to 5, with the help of this grant, which is kind of what the goal is. At that point, right now, council has been putting money aside for the EAB response plan. So one of the options that I've mentioned before is, instead of taking that money away, potentially you could reallocate that money. Instead of taking ash trees and a 1 for 1, you could allocate that money to maybe some additional staff time to help with what Gabby was just explaining, and also to plant more trees. So I think that's one thing that we'll continue to look at. And when we get to that point, we'll bring some options before council at that time for you to consider how do we staff it, and also maybe increase the number of trees that are being planted.
Yep, thanks.
I couldn't agree more with you in terms of, if you can dedicate time in terms of getting them not only planted, but watered and maintained. And I hate to say it, but in my neighborhood, you've planted some super nice trees and people are not watering them, and they look, unfortunately, terrible.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. And so it's like, if we can help accelerate that by some staffing and get them, and I know you guys came out and you tried to water them as well too, but the point is, it's just, and they're expensive.
Yeah, they are expensive. And I think, Gabby has done a good job of talking to homeowners that we have planted trees in their front yard and say, hey, and actually having the homeowners have some ownership in it instead of, oh, that's the city's responsibility. We want people to buy into this,
Yeah.
to what we do.
Yeah.
And because it's, improves their property, improves their, helps with their utilities, costs, and all those different things. They're a great benefit for the community. And if we get people to just get on board with that, then, so.
And there are people that do take care of them.
Exactly.
Those that don't.
And we're
It's
very
just-
thankful for that.
It's heartbreaking to see.
Yeah. It's a big investment for
$200,
us.
$300, $400 tree just.
Right.
die.
So maybe, Gabby, how about if you can just maybe explain just what you've done over the last year? Maybe all of you have seen the buckets next to these trees. And
Hard to
then
miss
with
them.
with
Two of them on my block right now.
with a dedicated water this summer. So why don't you just explain that real quick?
Yes. So last spring, we began a new program. I just informally call it the water bucket program because it makes the most sense. We take 5-gallon buckets and drill a single hole in the bottom of the bucket and loosely attach it with some nice twine to every newly planted tree. And then our staff goes through and waters those newly planted trees once a week. By using the 5-gallon buckets, we're able to accurately assess how much water they're getting. Ideally, newly planted trees should get about 10 gallons of water every week. Mm-hmm. So if we know, hey, if we fill this bucket, we're at least getting 5 gallons of water. Before the process was, just stand here with a hose and kind of guess. And some people guessed high, some people guessed low. It was never really all that accurate. So the buckets are a way to improve that accuracy. Then what we did in addition to that is we created some informational stickers that go on those buckets that talk about intended to be used by the homeowner or people walking by to say, what is this bucket and why is it here and how can I use it? And it's very simple. You move the bucket, you fill it with 5 gallons of water and you walk away and it slowly drains. The 5-gallon bucket also simulates a slow drain water system. And so the water drains out slowly over about 45 minutes. And what that allows it to do is the water seeps further into the soil column, getting more of the root ball with the available water as opposed to just with a hose, a high pressure, and it all washes away on the surface. So we've implemented that program. It's gone over really well. I haven't had too many complaints about ugly buckets in my yard. Most people are pretty supportive of it. We took them back to our shop this last winter, and then we redeployed them again this spring for our new trees. And then in addition, this year, we actually were able to hire an additional seasonal staff that is dedicated just to watering trees. In the past, our Parks and Recreation Department had a seasonal staff watering our flower beds, Adopt a Flower Bed Garden, and various other flower pots around town. Now we have a seasonal watering just for watering trees. And that's made a big difference. We've been able to water all of our memorial trees, for instance. That hasn't happened in previous years. So we're looking forward to seeing the impact of that improved survivability with intentional and scheduled watering.
I think we're on tree number 3 in front of my neighbor's house. Campus Town is a tough neighborhood for baby trees.
Yeah.
And I want to thank.
Go ahead,
Sorry.
Emma. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Emma.
I'm sorry, Gloria.
Well, I was just going to say, I appreciate your work on this grant, Emily, and I think it's wonderful. The only question I have is, typically we hear if an EAB tree is taken down or if a tree anywhere is taken down, it's replaced somewhere. So it's not necessarily going into the same location.
Mm-hmm.
I assume we're limited by the map for where we can put the trees. Are we limited by blue or gold areas?
No.
So anything that's been approved.
Yes. Yeah. The different coloration is just meant to show the additional blocks. But when it comes to ash removal and replacement, it would all be in that area. And while we do say the replacement trees can be planted anywhere, we do make an effort to keep it relatively close to the area that it was originally at. So for instance, this last fall, we were able to plant all of them pretty much right back in the house that it was taken from and the right of way it was taken from. The previous year, we did have to move some just because there are some times where trees really shouldn't be there in the first place. And so we're kind of taking the opportunity to say, this tree never really should have been planted there. Let's move it somewhere that it'd be more successful. Usually in that time, we've been able to keep it within a block radius of where the tree was removed. And so it might not be exactly at that property, but it is very close to where it is.
Great.
Emily, go ahead.
So I have 2 questions. The first one is, when you say replacement for the ash trees, would it be the replacement of would it be replaced with another ash tree or a different type of tree where the problem with the bugs wouldn't be as big of an issue?
So our replacements are not ash. We are not planting any ash any further. The emerald ash borer, it will affect all ash trees after they reach about 6 inches in diameter, and it is pretty much a 99% chance that that tree is going to die because of those ash borers. So we do not plant ash. We're also striving not to plant maple trees because maples are a high percentage of our urban canopy already. And so I was looking at some data, and since I've begun here, so in 2022 and then all of 2023, we planted about 355 trees, and out of those 355, it was a mixture of 45 different species. So we're planting a wide variety of species, and what that might mean is when our list gets out, we might be planting a dozen different species in a neighborhood, and that might only mean 5 of that one type of tree, 5 of another tree. And that's very intentional, and it is to create a more resilient canopy. So that way we don't have something like 18 or 20% or more of our canopy being one species that then is affected by this ash borer. So when we do the ash replacements, we do bid out. It is a large enough contract to bid that out. The contractor is required to work with me on the species selection. I believe the last round that we had that was planted last fall was, I want to say, maybe 8 or 9 different species out of the ones that we had all planted. So we're intentionally planting a wide variety, but no more ash, and we try to limit the maples as much as we can.
Second question, Emily.
That was awesome. Thank you. There's a forestry club at Iowa State, and I'm just wondering when you're talking about with the trees when they're younger, how much work goes into taking care of those. Would it be something you guys are interested in at all if I reach out to that club and see if they would be interested in any volunteering with you guys, just to kind of the ideas align? And if you guys would be interested in any work with students for volunteering with some of that, I would totally reach out to their club.
I'm smiling because I went to Iowa State University and I was in forestry club when I went to Iowa State. So yes, that's something that we've definitely considered, utilizing Iowa State and the resources that they have with their student clubs, as well as just their students. We do regularly partner with Iowa State Forestry and their NREM department on plantings and care around. I usually have at least one full day doing urban forestry work with the forestry clubs and students throughout town. We've talked about that. We're kind of fine-tuning it. There's a lot that goes into that sort of stuff, a lot of training that I want to make sure that when we're out doing young tree training, it is important that it's done correctly. But we are definitely open to encouraging volunteers to help with that as much as we can. It's just there's always the good and the bad that comes with volunteer organizations in that way.
All right.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Gabby, on behalf of council and our city, thank you for your efforts. And if you can keep this up and find grants for other things in the city, we would absolutely love it. So, but about $810,500. What a wonderful asset that's going to be, and how much it's going to help our community. So, thank you. With that, I entertain a motion on resolution approving the agreement with Arbor Day Foundation, accepting the U.S. Forest Service Inflation Reduction Urban and Community Forestry Grant in the amount of $810,500.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
One thing, Mayor, before we do, I'm going to support of this tonight. But one thing that's important to note, I mean, this money was already secured, but I have strong concerns about the federal government's spending money on urban trees. How in the world could the federal government care about planting trees in our community? That's completely beyond the scope of the federal government. Our federal debt load right now is $34 trillion. And so all of these programs that seem well and good are contributing to this, and we're participating in all this. So it's different. I would vote against this, not based on, because I love the program. I love what you're doing. I just wish that we were paying for it. $810,000, we could pay for this ourselves. We don't need a federal grant. We have the means within our community to pay for this right now. If it's a priority for the council, we could do that. But I just want council to be cognizant when we're taking federal dollars like this, this is not helping our national problem. And we're citizens not just of our community, but also of the country.
Roll call.
Aye.
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 All right, very good. Thank you both for coming. Thank you, Keith. All right, move on to item 53. Entertain motion on third reading and adoption of ordinance number 4532 on a zoning text amendment.
Move on third.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 And item number 54, entertain motion on third reading and adoption of ordinance number 4533, rezoning 2212 Oakwood and adjacent right-of-way.
Move on third.
Second.
Roll call.
Aye.
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 And item 55, entertain motion on third reading and adoption of ordinance number 4534 relating to a zoning text amendment for 20% alternative design adjustments.
Move on third.
Second.
Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. Entertain on item 56. Entertain motion on third reading and adoption of ordinance number 4535 on zoning text amendment on updates to Chapter 9 floodplain zoning regulations.
Move on third.
Second.
Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. And item number 57, entertain motion on third reading and adoption of ordinance number 4536 on zoning text amendment to allow mixed-use development and research and innovation zoning district, ISU Research Park.
Move on third.
Second.
Roll call.
Aye.
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 All right, we'll move on to disposition, the communications to council, and we have quite a few tonight. The first one is a email from Jody Edwards, Ames resident, regarding bike safety and a reference to a article that was in a magazine.
There's any action.
No.
Oh.
Just pass on along to staff.
Move we take no action.
For a second. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. Second memo from Corey Mellons regarding utility payment drop box. This was a referral from council to staff. And is there a motion? If you want to, he concludes with if council decides to proceed with the request. I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong one. Is there any interest to take?
There's a question whether it meets ADA requirements. And
Right.
background.
Is there any interest in doing any kind of changes to the location or the heights?
Move we take no action.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Next is an email from Tim Shuck regarding Ames trash collection. I think this is just more or less more information relative to the topic at hand.
Right.
Fourth is a request for code enforcement update from John Joyner.
Want to refer this to staff?
Or to legal, right?
Well, legal will work with staff. Yeah.
Move we refer to staff.
Give it to Mark. That's right. Give it to legal.
Second.
Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Next is a memo from Kelly on Romero House request for zoning text amendment.
If you want to proceed with this, you'd place it on a future agenda to discuss moving ahead with the text amendment, give you more information.
Move we place on a future agenda.
Second.
Okay, those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Next is a little blue stem court safety. Mr. Burbano was also here earlier. Is there any interest in? I think actually Keith, I believe,
Keith handled the
tree issue.
Mhm.
But there's an issue of speeding or concern about that. It's a different issue.
So is this a memo issue or a traffic study issue?
That's what you need.
Well, isn't staff already?
I think you want to refer it to us to work to do us analysis of it.
Okay, so I would move that we have staff work through the analysis of the situation on Mortensen.
Second.
Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Next is an email from Jennifer Adams regarding campus town public improvements and offering to be of assistance.
No action.
It seemed like quite a few of these were regarding private property rather than public property. Other than the beautiful trees on Welch Avenue that are gone. I would move that we have the mayor or someone else respond to Ms. Adams to fill her in on which things we have control over and what is being done about those things.
I would second.
Okay. Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried.
So Steve, is this a place where we should have a broader conversation about the improvements we made on Welch Avenue and to review that at some point? Is this sort of a logical juncture?
I'm not sure the tie, which she's brought up the issues.
Yeah, I mean, the areas that we installed there were well intentioned, but I just don't know that they've played out as well as we hoped.
Oh,
We
you're
had a
talking
memo
about.
on that very recently.
Yeah.
That's
Pardon me?
that's
We had a
the,
memo on that very
that's sort of
recently.
the stormwater drainage
Right.
techniques, but I think she's bringing up other issues.
Is this something we should address at some point?
I
Well,
thought staff gave us a
We gave you a
plan.
memo last time.
With a
And how we're
plan,
gonna handle it.
With a plan.
Related just to that one topic though,
Yeah.
not, this is broader.
Okay.
Okay. Next is a email from Mark Clipsham regarding affordable housing suggestions. It just seemed that thank you for the information
good
would be
information.
appropriate.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Can we
I'll-
be sure that staff gets this information, the email? Just
Sure.
So they have it,
I'll respond to him and thank him and
Carly will get
copy Kelly on it or
Kelly.
something,
Vanessa.
or Vanessa, whoever.
you'll take care.
Planning, somebody.
You
in
got
planning.
you got access to this, right? Okay. All right. Thank you. Next is a petition for a four-way stop at 80 Hayden Road and McFarland Avenue from Jamie Shore. And council, I think you also have a petition with us. I think it's 70 some signatures.
Can we just get a memo or
You want us to do analysis or get?
I didn't say that.
Is this an area that we have had?
It seems like there's already been some analysis done.
Could be.
Yeah. How
So
about
that's why I was
That you're thinking
of getting a memo of.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. So a memo from, it'll come from the traffic engineer.
Yes,
Second.
I would move that.
Okay. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Next is a email from Carol Lippard regarding excessive speed on Northwestern.
I would move we refer it to staff for response.
Second?
Memo, you want?
No.
No,
A response
no.
from staff.
Oh,
Response
sorry.
from staff if they-
To the citizen, directly to the
Yes.
citizen?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, yes.
Okay. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. And last is a letter from Scott Mormon regarding downtown facade grant eligibility on the south side of their facility.
So can we just place this on an agenda? Do we
Good to
need-
talk about the philosophy and different options, kind of how you address it.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it might fit in to the current program.
Wouldn't expanding the current program require us to prioritize it in the work plan though?
It depends what you expect to make any changes. If they're easy changes, how we're going to handle it, it could go very smoothly. If you want an in-depth list of new criteria,
I would
criteria
like the very quickest and simplest way.
Right, but we need to know what you want to
I know.
to
It
qualify.
just,
So we should have a
it just
discussion on it.
seems like some of the criteria could work for this particular
That's my
project.
motion. Let's.
I
bring it
think
back
it
to
should
you.
just go on the agenda.
Yes. Yeah.
So we can discuss it.
Discuss it.
Yeah.
That's my
Let's do
motion.
that.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. All right. There's also, should be on your, on the dais here, that a memo from Steve regarding John Joyner being interim municipal engineer.
Oh, yeah.
It's just for information. And then also, this just got delivered to you a few minutes before, and that is, there's this packet that came from Alfredo Parish regarding item number 49. And so you may want to just peruse through that, maybe even during our closed session as we have that conversation. All right, report of governing board. Discover Ames, ACBB, any report?
Yeah, we had a meeting last Thursday. A successful audit of the financials was presented. And yeah, that's about all.
AEDC?
So I have kind of a combined update from the May 17th meeting and the June 21st meeting. Both of those meetings focused a fair amount on housing and some of the exciting things that are happening in communities around us. And I noted that Boone and Webster City, which is now a member of the area, announcement came today that the rebranding of the AEDC and the chamber as the Ames Regional Economic Alliance is official. So both Webster City and Boone have been successful in adding upper story housing downtown. And I found that interesting, and it may be worth our finding out how they were able to do that. There was also a note that the state is hoping that Ames will be looking for workforce housing opportunities and contacting them about that. There is an opportunity if you want to see an affordable housing community in Boone tomorrow. They're cutting a ribbon on, I believe it is called Kate's Landing, but I may be confusing that. No, it's the Villas at Fox Point in Boone, which is tomorrow at 4 p.m. at 1118 Collin Drive. If you'd like to see what some of the affordable housing product looks like that other communities are getting. And I think an exciting new addition to downtown Ames is a new executive director who is also going to be taking on the position of new vice president of downtown development, along with being the executive director of Ames Main Street. Travis Tolliver spent the last 10 years at the Waverly, Iowa Chamber of Commerce, and Waverly is a Main Street community. And prior to that, he spent several years in the hospitality industry, and he'll be starting August 5th. So he should be a really good addition to our Main Street organization.
Thank you. Story County Emergency Management does not meet until July, so it leaves us with transit.
We did meet for transit, just talked about sort of some routine grant applications that we do every year, fuel purchase contract, the short-term lease at the intermodal facility, but pretty routine meeting. So That's all.
Very good.
I did forget one thing with
Please, go ahead.
the Discover Ames. So Kevin Bork mentioned that he was able to go to ITGA and is very excited about opportunities to bring the conference to Ames. So stay tuned.
Very good. Thank you. All right, council comments. Emily, we'll start with you tonight.
One other thing about transit is we had the rodeo here last month, and from my understanding, it was a sweep for Ames Transit. So we're the best in the state apparently, which is good for us. And then I will be in person at the next meeting, or not at the next meeting, but on the 23rd of July, and hopefully for the rest of them after that, as long as I can strike an agreement with my sister about the car. So that might be a challenge. And then I'm planning on moving back to Ames on the 3rd of August, so I'll be there that day. And then I did get your email, Mr. Mayor, last Thursday, Friday. I don't remember what day it was. And so if you just want to send a follow-up email, sounds good to me. I'm trying to think of anything else. I don't think I have anything else right now, but I will let you guys know if I do. Oh, I'm meeting with Martin and Quinn tomorrow. So I might have more for you guys at the next meeting, but I don't have much else today.
Thank you. Appreciate you participating virtually. Gloria.
I don't think I have anything tonight.
Tim?
One question, Mayor. We received an email from Dylan Klein with respect to the geothermal cost analysis. Is that going to be in the next council packet? We received it last Friday. Maybe it was
I
before
think
the
it got
cutoff.
inadvertently omitted. You're right.
Maybe that
and
could
actually-
be added to the next batch. We had quite a few to go through.
We'll do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just two comments tonight. I know I speak for the council that our hearts are with the communities in northern Iowa. We are well acquainted with the impacts of flooding, and the pictures are heart-rendering, and we wish the best in the work that's ahead for the northern cities. And then second, I don't know if anyone noticed this, it's very hot. And I want to just acknowledge we have many city staff who don't get to sit in the air conditioning, and they're working in this weather all the time. So we appreciate the people who are doing the hard work for us in this heat. That's all I have tonight.
Thank you. Rachel?
We don't have a meeting next week, so just wanted to mention the 3rd of July fireworks. It'll be after sun goes down near Jack Trice Stadium, and then we have our 4th of July parade on Main Street on July 4th at 11 a.m.
Thank you. Amber?
Nothing for me.
Just again, to Mr. Davis's comments about over on Harrison and Welbeck, that we do appreciate the young people who came out and spoke on behalf of that area. And we hope that we can do good things for the community still, even though we couldn't do what they might have hoped.
Thank you.
Two things for me. One is I mentioned when we were talking about the earlier agenda item, maybe asking for a memo from staff on what we might consider for either a municipal infraction for a landlord who is negligent in the upkeep of their property in such a way that it displaces someone, or I guess so two-part, either that, the municipal infraction, or what kind of information we might proactively provide to tenants in a situation like that, just to help educate them on their legal options and obligations in order to
I got a city attorney.
Yeah, so I sort of a memo from two departments,
No,
but part of,
it'd be city attorney.
okay, yeah, so that would, yeah, I would ask for a memo from the city attorney on that.
Is there a second?
Second.
Go ahead.
My concern on this, this is an egregious situation, but it's one egregious situation. And we typically are hesitant about putting new measures in place based on a single event. And I just don't think we have a track record of these kind of incidents. I think this is really isolated. So I'm also concerned that the landlord-tenant code is designed by the statute to be the law in Iowa. And so cities aren't allowed to enhance and change the dynamic between the landlord and the tenant. Where we can have a role is in inspections. And from my perspective, I think we do a really good job on inspections. So I appreciate the severity of this. I'm supportive of our efforts to help the tenants, but I'm reluctant to support changing the code based on one incident.
Okay.
The motion was for
A memo.
Memo.
Yeah.
Just information.
Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carried.
And I just wanted to second Councilman Garton's comments about Northern Iowa. I think I'm from Emmitsburg originally. It's very close to Spencer. I know a lot of people still there. I have an aunt that lives there, and it's really bad. And I think, I both want to acknowledge the human cost of, the mental cost of that sort of property loss, but also I think it's sobering to think about that as a cost of climate change, right? And these are the kind of costs that we talk about when we talk about continued effects of climate change. And so I just want us to be aware that this is that on display, and we will continue to see increased drought and increased rain events in Iowa. And that there's a human cost to that in terms of lost property and the anguish that causes, but also a financial cost to that. And it's very sobering to think about what those folks are going through, and definitely my thoughts have been with them. So,
Thank you. A couple of really exciting events that happened last week. One, we had council night at the band shell. Thank you for everyone for being there, and it's certainly always an honor to have Simon Estes there and to have him do some narration. So a great night, great turnout. Thanks to staff for all your coordination, and I know that the ice cream and water was greatly appreciated. Secondly, there was almost 400 triathletes on Sunday at the Ames Triathlon at Ada Hayden. And not only does it bring athletes, but it brings supporters, families, friends from all over. And it continues to grow. And talking with the triathlon certified official, this is becoming a pretty premier triathlon in the state of Iowa. And I stress it's the only time that people can actually swim in Ada Hayden. And it's they appreciate that. So it's just appreciate all the volunteer work. Tim and Keisha Fensel do a tremendous job organizing it, and it's a great asset. We thanks to staff for working with them to make this happen. And last is I have a memo I'll be sending out in the next day or two to council regarding following up on these desired for tours for different destinations as council. And so I have three things I'm going to propose that kind of tie in with where we're going. One is the park. One is a recycling center down in Grimes. That would tie. It's very, very innovative. And then the other one is going to be going over to see Nevada's new field house for indoor. So we'll get that out to you, and then staff will begin trying to get that set up. So just following up on that. So that'll take us through the end of this calendar year. So with that, Mark, does council have a justification to go into closed session this evening?
Yes,
Iowa code provides that the council can go in a closed session to discuss matters in litigation or threatened litigations, Iowa Code Section 21.51C. Before the council votes, makes a motion and votes, I just want to state for the record that the council delayed the vote on item 49 until after the closed session. I just want to make clear for the record that we will not be discussing item 49 in the closed session, even
Thank
though, and we will be discussing a litigation matter. So,
Thank you. Is there a motion to go into closed session?
Will we go into closed session?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. We are back in open session. All right, we are back in open session. Is there a motion relative to the matter discussed during closed session?
I move we deny the request for settlement.
Second.
Okay. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. Now we're going to go back to item number 49, and that is a motion approving or denying the 12-month Class E retail alcohol license for Neighborhood Liquor and Smokes at 3505 Lincoln Way, Suite 105. Is there a motion relative to that matter?
Would move we deny the application.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Roll call.
Aye.
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 All right. Thank you very much, council. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move we adjourn.
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you. Okay.